Starting again this afternoon's innovation experimentation track with Primavera de Filippi, which is a Foresight Fellow and is a participant in our Intelligent Cooperation Group, and it's going to tell us about Extitutions. Maybe you want to say a word before this is
yes.
loading.
So Extitution is a new theory that was actually born in the room there a few years ago. And the idea is that, like me and some other scholars, with this fundamental belief that this is absolutely interesting and to explore like all the different ways in which we can actually improve the state of the world, but there is like a underlying problem that needs to be tackled in order for all those efforts to succeed, which is actually creating new mechanisms of coordination and new mechanisms of cooperation in order to somehow move away from the current modalities where the dominant strategy is competition towards a new framework in which dominant strategy will be cooperation, and therefore all the efforts on all those exploration and scientific discovery can be done in a more efficient way. And so, extitutional theory is a theory that is trying to contrast with the more traditional notion of institutional theory, and it is based on the premises that we have been constantly taught and indoctrinated with the notion of what is an institution, how do they operate, how do we institutionalize, and so forth. And somehow we look at the world constantly from this same standpoint, and everything we see is institutional structures and roles and rules and all those things. And so extitutional theory is about creating a different lens, a different way of looking at exactly the same thing, which are social dynamics, in order to enable us to choose which lens do we want to wear in order to be able to analyze and describe and also design in different ways the same social dynamics. So, anyway, I can start because I pretty much know the thing by heart. Do we have it? Yeah. Anyway, so the basic premise of extitutional theory is that sometimes you just need like a new vocabulary, a new word, and the fact that you have a theory associated with this new word means that all of a sudden we have the possibility of seeing and thinking and discussing and elaborating new protocols, new mechanisms, because we have this new ontological tool that we can use to understand the world. And the world has both a descriptive function, it enables us to describe things in a different way, but it also has a performative function, because once you start seeing things in a different way, you also start interacting with the things that you're describing in a different way. So, so this is like social groups, and not all social groups can be defined as an institution. But there is like, at some point when there is like some kind of structured social dynamics that are recognizable and so forth, we start actually recognizing some institutional fabric into those social interactions. So the usual way in which we understand, describe, analyze, and construct social dynamics is through institutional frameworks and therefore the social structure. What we want to provide with institutional theory is this alternative lens that is looking at the same thing, but looking instead at looking at the social structure. It's looking at the actual social dynamics and interpersonal dynamics. And so this is an example. The Berkman Center, which is like the research center where I'm at, it can be analyzed in multiple ways. We can look at it from the institutional lens, which is, it is like a research center that belongs to Harvard University. It has like an executive director, it has like fellows, it has staff, it has like all those kind of like institutional rules and roles that are associated with it. And that's one way of understanding this center. Or we can actually look at it from an extitutional lens, and in the extitutional lens, it's no longer about what are the rules, the roles, and what are the institutions that frame it, but it's actually about who are the people and what are the individual identities that make up this center, and what are the interpersonal relationships that exist between those different individuals. And so to understand like the compare and contrast between institution and extitution. So institution, the DNA of an institution is the roles and the rules. And that means that we create a structure with a set of roles and rules, and then we need to find people that can match the role, and we put them in the little box. But those people are pretty much fungible, because you can remove the person and put a new person. As long as the roles and the rules among those roles stays the same, the institutional structure did not change. So it is the whole, it is the overall structure that defines what every individual parts have to do, given the roles and the rules. When we move into the institutional framework, the DNA is individuals, identities, and relationships. And so in this case, people are no longer fungible, because if you remove one person, you're changing the individuals and you're changing the relationship, then the whole also changed. And so as opposed to this place in which like it is the whole that defines the parts, here it is actually the pattern is the aggregation of all those individuals together with their relationship and interdependencies that actually create the whole, which is the institution. So this is kind of like a little example illustration. So this is the objective layer. So this is just people interacting with people, and then we try to understand, so why are they interacting that way? And then we can extrapolate from like the institutional model, and we start understanding why they relate to each other, because this one is the boss of this one is the colleague of that, and then there are the real that explain those type of interaction. And if we want to change those interactions, we can change the institutional structure, and it's going to have a causation on the way in which people interact. Or we can also look at it from an institutional perspective, which is, it's not about the roles and the rules, it's not about the organigram, it's actually about why do people like each other, people hate each other, what is their individual and interpersonal relationship, and then this is actually dictating, the individual relationship dictates the type of interaction. And again, we can understand, by understanding this and this, we can understand that, but also we can shape this by modifying either the institutional structure or the institutional fabric. The point is that most of the time we are focusing mostly on this, like when there is a problem, we're going to change this, or we're going to create a new role or create a new rule in order to fix the interaction, but we don't really see how it's actually affecting this, and we not very often use those tools, the process of extitutionalization, in order to actually have an impact on the objective layer. And then in terms of like participation, so in an institution you have like a closed box. And so you know exactly who is a member, who is not a member, and so you have like this kind of boundaries of an institution. Whereas in an institution there is no boundaries, and therefore there is no concept of membership or non-membership, but instead we rely on the concept of participation. To which extent are people participating to the institution, and we can map it, instead of having a box with people in and out, we can map it as this kind of rhizomatic network where we have like multiple people constantly connecting and interconnecting with each other. And the more you participate, the more you are a core participant in the institution, but there is never like, it's always a matter of degree. There's always, yeah.
I don't understand, like, I don't feel like it's a dichotomy. Like, if you're a member of a group, and you participate in that group, and you have roles, and you have roles determined by the individuals within that group. Like,
Yeah, it's not a dichotomy, it's this. What? No, it's not a dichotomy in the sense that, yes, you can look at the same social group, either you put the institutional lens and you're going to see what are the roles and what are the boundaries of that institution, or you put the institutional lens and you're going to see who are the people who are participating and what are the social relationships between the people participating. So an institution and an institution is always the same thing. It's always looking at the same objective layer, which is a group of structured interaction. And depending on what lens you wear, then you will see different things, right? And the whole point of institutional theory is to disentangle, because in institutional theory there is a lot of things that we consider belong to the institutional practices, and so by disentangling them, then you have a better understanding of how they interact with each other, and how changing this, change that, and therefore change this. And so how can you affect the institution by changing the institution, and vice versa, right? So this is not dichotomatic, this is actually just describing ontologically what are the different characteristics of each one of those lenses.
Do you think there are certain situations where something is happening and it cannot be looked at only from, it can only be looked at from one of the two perspectives, or there's sort of a singularity in there? So just an idea that's sort of coming to mind right now is when you go back to the membership/participation element, participation, observation, agent X does not participate in the ritual of contributing work and going to, like, attending meetings. And then how does that is the extitutional description, and the institutional description is agent X has left the organization, for example. Is that like?
Yeah. I mean, for instance,
Okay,
like
there's always sort of two ways.
you
to
can.
start
I think you
saying
can. There's hardly something that doesn't have at least a bit of an institutional and extitutional flavor. You have some things are more easily described institutionally. Like if you take like a super hardcore bureaucracy, that's a lot of institutional. But you can also have a very strong, like if it's a very bureaucratic system that is like highly corrupted, right? So the corruption is like the institutional side of the institutional bureaucracy. So I think you can. It's also not a continuum. Like you can have something that has very little institution, very little extitution, and you can have things that are very high extitution and very high institution at the same time. And you can have things that are super institutional, very little extitution. So it's just like everything is like it's kind of orthogonal. You can look at it and you can only see something from either the institutional lens or the extitutional lens. But it's not. They don't look at the same thing, right?
I guess what I'm like getting at is I think that like there's like an overlap in that Venn diagram, right? Where it's like, for example, your role, and it is based off based on the relationship. So like the power distribution between individuals and the execution in the relationships, that like power that's like circumscribed, like that the relationships capture that those power dynamics, which rules also capture. So like I guess when I look at these relations, when I look at the sock inside out, I see as like individuals forming individuals form a community, and you can look at the community the other way around, all the individuals composing it. But like the relationship and the roles between these individuals and the community are like, you know.
Yeah, so this is where everything is entangled. Right? This is the reality. Actually, this is more than just those two things. This is like the objective layer who will not understand it. There's like so many reasons why people are interacting in a particular manner. So this is an ontological disentanglement. This is like the institutional framework is looking at the whole, right? So that person is acting in this way because of a particular role. But it's also acting in this way because of that particular thing. And sometimes those are compatible, sometimes they are conflictual. But so you need to have an understanding of this and that separately in order to have a better understanding of what is
So you
happening.
understand the power and the relationship to understand the interaction.
I wouldn't say that this is power, and this can also be very strong power. This is like interpersonal relationship, people from people. This is like institutional
relationship.
Yes, exactly. This is impersonal. This is like whoever is matching the role is doing it. This is personal. And by disentangling it, you can understand how those two interplay with each other. I don't think there is an overlap because ontologically it has been defined so that there is no overlap, but there is a very strong interplay. And this is why disentangling it is very useful because then you understand better the interplay.
Isn't this what culture is made from? It's like people plus process. In the end, like the process is the institutional, and then people is what you call extitutional.
So the people are here. The people is just people, bodies interacting with some other body, right? So that's what happened here. And then this is just a modelization. Like the institution doesn't exist. The institution is something we have in our own mind. We are modeling poles and reels into the world in order to affect interactions. And then we're also modeling individual relationship or we're experiencing individual relationship. And this is the overarching culture. And this is like the structure. We have institutional structure and exstitutional culture, and all together are shaping and informing the way in which systems interact with one another.
One question before we do more questions. I don't know how much you still have to tell us, but we have 9 minutes, so perhaps you want
I mean, I like answering
you
the
like
question
it, okay.
as we go.
Okay, I just
Yeah.
want to make sure that you can go
It
all the
doesn't
way.
matter. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Do you think there could be a chain of arguments to say that the fitness of an organization is determined by how much its institutional and its executional map overlap? So if you have an organization that has, like, a lot of corruption is something that I think most people would agree, is reducing organizational fitness and is like harming the overall functionality of a jurisdiction. And corruption in that sense would be when the executional structure does not map onto the institutional structure. So someone communicates the intention, I am the CEO or I am the Supreme Court, but in fact, and that everybody has an expectation of then how that person functions and interrelates, institutional lens, and then the executional lens is, however, that Supreme Court judge is highly controlled by an outside party which doesn't even show up in the communicated concept of how people are expected to work, and that's where dysfunction emerges.
Yeah, so that's a super interesting question. I wouldn't call it fitness. I think fitness as a connotation that is better. I don't think it's better. I think it's more transparent, if anything, but that's about it. So if you're maximizing objective function, let's make it more transparent, yes. But no, I would say that in my own, like, if we want to put an actual connotation of like what is best, and that's only my personal opinion, I would say that the best is where you have the minimal amount. Like, to me, the execution is what gives the fitness. Like, when you have something that is alive, an institution that's alive is because there is executional dynamics, because people are excited and passionate and like working. But the problem is that executions can deviate into like some bad stuff, corruption, manipulation, nepotism, all this stuff. And so you want to create institutional scaffoldings in order to prevent executional dynamics to go bad, and in order to support. So you are like institutions also like sustain things, right? So in my view, like if you manage to create like something where the institutional scaffolding is just it's minimal viable institution to enable a very lively and positive execution. But the more you add, the point is that the more you add institutional rules in order to shape something, you're also reducing the benefits that the execution would have had. So for instance, like if I want to avoid conflict of interest, I'm going to create a rule, you cannot do it for it, but then you lose the alignment of interest, right? And vice versa. So I wanna prevent corruption, so I'm gonna create like strict rules, but then I cannot also get like people that are just like trying to help. Yeah. So every time you create an institutional rule to confine and to constrain negative deviance of the execution, you're also constraining the positive deviance of the execution. So the most fit, in my view, will be the one that has the minimum amount. And if you need the institution, you need to use it seeing and knowing what's the impact on the execution, so that you can frame it properly. And the problem today, I think, is that we have a tendency, because that's what we've been taught, that when there is a problem, we institutionalize, we create a new role, a new rule, and the problem is that this is solving one problem, but it's creating a new problem, and so you need to re-institutionalize to solve that new problem, and so we're constantly leading into a tendency of over-institutionalization to solve all the problems that the previous institutionalization has caused. And to me, like what we need to discover, and this is what the executional theory is trying to do, is like what is the process, like sometimes you can fix a problem not by institutionalization, but by exstitutionalization, right? And that means like solving, like if you have like hate speech, so you can make it illegal to do hate speech, but whereas the problem is like people still hate each other, but just not speak about it. This is an institutional problem, but then it might an institutional solution, but if you're not solving the core of the problem will be like, why are people hating each other and how do we actually solve that, right? So in some way the institutionalization is the easy way, but it's oftentimes, it has a collateral side effect that is preventing the execution from, one, solving its problem through a different mechanism, and two, that is like now confined, and the positive side of the rule cannot also be exercised, right? So the executional theory, the main exercise is to understand how institutions are affecting execution and how execution are affecting institutions, and then creating a toolkit for executionalization that then we can choose correctly what is the right balance between institutionalizing and executionalizing a social goal.
This is, as an ontological exercise, this is absolutely fascinating. So like the representation that you put there I mean, it's hidden now, but that institutional map, as with any institutional hierarchy, can always be depicted in 2 dimensions. I would argue that institutional layer below is going to be inherently multi-dimensional. So I can see, for example, in the interpersonal relationships, I don't know, is this deliberate, the thickness of the lines? Is that to do with the strength of the relationship? Right, okay. But that will not take place on just one plane. And I think what's really interesting, right, is that when personal relationships, I mean, let's the 3 that I can think of: romantic, religious, political. What I'm interested in, you then strike upon issues there which, how do you actually codify that, for example, in the framework of an institution? Where, I mean, I presume this is the same in other places. In the UK, for example, these are all like what we call protected characteristics. You gather the data, but it's all hidden. You never know that about your employees, for example. So what can you actually, my question I suppose is, how do you see down the line the theory actually potentially being implemented? Because I can see quite a few barriers in the way. I think it's very worthwhile. I just can't see exactly how it's.
No, I mean, I think there are barriers, but those barriers, by the way, those barriers are oftentimes institutional rules that are now, like, you create I don't know, anti-discrimination rule, right? And that means that now you actually cannot ask questions. So why is this anti-discrimination rule existing? Can you actually create anti-discrimination that you're acting on the institutional layer, right? And I don't know, I think not all problems can be solved in one or the other. Usually it's always a combination of the 2. The problem today that I see is that we have gone way too far on that direction. And now we're actually struggling with these like empty and dry and like bureaucratic institutions that have killed the potential that the institution had. And I think that I can send you a lot of documentation. We studied like the life cycle of non-profits, for instance. Right, so many non-profits, not all of them, but there is a tendency. You have many non-profits, they start, and usually it's like a lot of very excited people that are like, you know, ideologically aligned, and they're like very strong executional dynamics. And then because they are very excited, they attract more people and more people and more people. And then at some point they're like, okay, now we actually are so cool, we're gonna ask for a grant and get money. But of course, when you get a grant, you also start getting deadlines and deliverables. And so all of a sudden you can rely on volunteers, so you're gonna hire staff. And then all of a sudden you start having a little bit of bureaucratization. And now you have staff that is giving orders to those volunteers that are like super excited and super aligned. The staff doesn't care, just want the money, And so all of a sudden they are like, I don't like it anymore because now it has become like staff-based and whatever. So all the volunteers leave, and therefore what you do, you need to hire more people that are also serving. And then you have like this kind of like emptiness in which like you end up with just staff working on a project without the passion because the institution has left. Right? So this is just, and it's interesting, like you can look at several organizations that actually follow this same path. And it's a pity because like there is the reason it was created was because of the institutional dynamic, but the institution is created and then the institution just wants to perdure, and then the goal of the institution is the survival of the institution instead of the achievement of the mission that the institution was created for.
I mean, that's an interesting debate to then have.
And all those things are like, they need an hours of debate.
It's end of the session, unfortunately. If you want a last word, but we are out of time.
But we're going to talk about the execution tonight until 5 a.m.
Yeah. That's the time slot, the actually lecture format. That's the teaser. Execution workshop deep dive near the fireplace. Always a pleasure.